So, one quite famous theory of gender is Raewyn Connell's theory of hegemonic masculinity. Basically, what Connell is saying is that gender, in terms of how we understand it, is organized in a hierarchy. So you've got things at the top and things at the bottom. The things at the top get more status and the things at the bottom get less status. So at the top, according to Raewyn Connell, if you think, if I asked you to draw masculinity or draw a man, what would you draw? You might draw things like muscles, facial hair. You might draw someone who appears strong. Well, that's what Raewyn Connell is saying. At the top, you've got hegemonic masculinity, which, to quote, is heterosexuality and marriage, physical toughness and paid work. In example, Raewyn Connell gives James Bond. You can think a lot of men aspire to be like James Bond, to be as masculine as him. But if you think about what kind of men emphasize this quality of masculinity, you might have certain images in your head: Tom Hardy, Vin Diesel, Arnold Schwarzenegger. The kind of images of masculinity you see on Instagram and things like that. And Raewyn Connell is saying that hegemonic masculinity is at the very top of the gender hierarchy. Not all men can get this type of masculinity, even though they might aspire to it, but all men benefit from this. So, for example, if all men are seen as tough, the idea is that all women might be afraid to be tough or might be scared of men because they're seen to be tough. And Raewyn Connell's got a name for this as well. She calls it complicit masculinity, i.e. all men benefit from this masculinity, or the patriarchal dividend, which just basically means that all men benefit from some men being seen to be tough. So you've got hegemonic masculinity at the top. Just underneath that, you've got subordinated masculinities. Subordinated means less than. So what Raewyn Connell's saying is that some types of masculinity are seen as being less valuable or less masculine than hegemonic masculinity. She uses the example of gay men. So they are seen by society as being less masculine than those who have hegemonic masculinity. Again, think of what kind of images you might see in the media of subordinated masculinities. You might see quite camp depictions of gay men and things like that. And Raewyn Connell is not saying, by the way, that gay men are less masculine or less valuable than straight men. What she's saying is that society sees it that way, because it's not individuals that choose these things, it's society. So you've got hegemonic masculinity, you've got subordinated masculinities. Beneath the masculinities are the femininities, and Raewyn Connell calls the ideal type of femininity emphasized femininity. And again, to quote, it is based on compliance, nurturance, and empathy. So those are the qualities that society says, if you want to be seen as feminine, you need to have. In younger women, that would be represented by sexual receptivity, and in older women, it would be represented by motherhood. So again, think of what kind of depictions you would see in the media of emphasized femininity. You might think of people like Kim Kardashian. Again, that idea of femininity that you might see on Instagram and things like that. And a lot of students seem to come up with the example of people like Holly Willoughby. She's very, very feminine. Raewyn Connell uses the example of Marilyn Monroe, and you can probably see why. And again, just below the emphasized femininity, which, by the way, emphasized femininity is kind of like the complement to hegemonic masculinity, because those are the ideals that men and women aspire to. Beneath emphasized femininity, you've got subordinated femininities. So femininities that are seen to be less valuable, less feminine than emphasized femininity. So Connell uses the example of feminists and witches. Those are women that go against the traditional ideas of femininity. And again, think of depictions in the media. You might think of celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres and things like that. And Raewyn Connell knows herself what subordinated femininity feels like and seems like in society, because she herself is a trans woman. who transitioned from being a man to a woman, and for a long time referred to herself as R. Connell, the gender neutral term. Okay, so that's just been a brief description of the gender hierarchy in our society. You've got hegemonic masculinity. Just beneath that, you've got subordinated masculinities. Then you've got emphasized femininity. Then you've got subordinated femininities. Raewyn Connell is basically saying that those things are put in place by society and we kind of aspire to live by them. And if we don't, we get social pressure to and stigma because we're not living by them. You could say those things have changed now. Perhaps they're not as powerful. We're more able to live in a way that's outside of those boundaries of masculinity and femininity. People can transition between genders. That's up to you, what you believe, but it's an interesting question nonetheless.